Do DLA Ignite. With me today, I've got Graciela, and what we're going to do is we're going to talk about hope and using it as a tool in our everyday lives. And Graciela has very kindly come on today and is going to share her expertise. I always ask my guests before we start, where can people find you?
Hello, everybody, and Tim. Thank you for having me. So you can find me on Instagram at songofmyself.ig, and I'm also on Twitter, SOM Coaching, which is also my website, somcoaching.com.
And
Facebook.
you're a big Twitter user, aren't you?
I've been consistently creating content since this year, so I'm kind of new at the Twitter game and just trying to adjust with all these changes happening.
I'm sure it'll sort itself out. I know when LinkedIn was bought by Microsoft, everybody said that the walls were coming down, and it all sorted itself out. So, but anyway, you in your life, you started off as an Avon lady at 19, didn't you?
I did, and that was so much fun. I've always kind of been described as that old soul and always had friends and uh, just acquaintances that were much older than me as a child, right? I was that kid. And so becoming an Avon lady at 19, I just found it so I don't know, it just entertained me so much. And so I was doing my bachelor's and running around, trying to sell Avon products to all of my student friends.
But that must have, I mean, that must have given you a whole bunch of life skills in terms of conversations and things like that.
Yes, it definitely helped me learn how to get out of that comfort zone. I was very used to entertaining people because I grew up with a father that was a musician. So we kind of did a lot of singing and performing. But to talk about sales, that was a brand new experience, right? So I literally just took everything my leader, right? Back then, there was no MLM concept, right? It wasn't a thing that we had in our vocabulary. So I took what my leader taught me and I just performed it, right? Word for word and did it consistently. And inevitably, I spent more money on the products myself than I was selling. Which is a hard lesson to learn as well, right? In the MLM
Yes.
or in the business industry, absolutely.
Mm. And you then but since then you've actually trained as a coach, haven't you?
Yes. So my transition into life coaching happened after getting furloughed in the corporate real estate arena, but there was a lot of coaching involved as a real estate agent. So I've been essentially coaching for about 8 years now. That's how long I've been licensed as a real estate agent, right? And then becoming a life coach just kind of elevated that into a more in-depth, personalized
Mm.
experience, right? Yeah.
And so one of the things that you've trained up it is you've got training on is toxic abuse and domestic violence.
So that's been my experience, right?
Right.
I'm a survivor of several just aspects of toxicity in the workforce as well, sibling relationships, and three of my previous, love relationships were also very toxic and violent in different aspects. And so, when I became a life coach, they tell you that you have to find a niche, right? And in that assignment of trying to narrow down who my audience was or who do I want to serve, I really realized that I had to look within. Who am I as an individual, and what have I been able to solve for myself through the healing journey and through my own personal growth work? And so, victims of toxic abuse was kind of one of those answers, because I have, now transitioned into a healthy relationship where there's a dialogue and mutual respect and mutual support. And so I want to help people achieve that for themselves, or just achieve happiness on their own, because it is possible, right? I've also done that as well. So to me, that was one of the most important people I wanted to help.
And I think it's so in our lives it's easier quite often to talk about things where we have our own experience because we can then draw upon those experiences, can't we?
Yeah, well, I think we've all heard, write about what you know, teach about what you know. We hear this a lot, and maybe that's just me. I've done a lot of research, but I didn't want to really dive into something that demanded a whole nother spectrum of learning, because that would just mean more time and less time with people, right? I graduated from my certification and I launched my business the very next day.
Mm.
So I was ready to help and ready to serve, and I didn't want to waste any time. And so far, it's been a wonderful experience to help that demographic, if you will, both women and men, not just women. So it's been very gratifying.
So I've got a note here. I've got a note down here that you help highly sensitive people.
Hmm. Yes. What would you like to know about that? So I think Tim froze. I'm not sure if you can hear me, Tim, but you are. Oh, there you are. Hi.
Hi.
You froze there for a second. So can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay, good. So about highly sensitive people, what would you like to know about that? Yes, I do help highly sensitive people.
So explain to us what that means and the help that you give.
So highly sensitive people is a term coined by Elaine Aron in 1991. She's a psychologist. And it really has to do with the senses, which there's a disconnect there between the cultural way of looking at sensitivity. Oh, you're so dramatic and you're so touchy and I can't offend you, everything I say, just, you overreact. And the actual fact, which is it's about sensitivity to the senses, which we all have five senses and we all have senses, right? And so, highly sensitive people, I consider it borderline a neurodivergence in itself, the same way that there's a spectrum of autism and ADHD, for examples, right? Because the brain just takes that sensory input and analyzes it a little bit different. And this can be very overwhelming when you're not in tune with what those sensitivities are. So, for example, somebody that is highly sensitive in their visual sense may get really triggered or anxious upon watching the news
Yeah.
and all that drama, right? Or upon watching, what's going on in Iran with the women,
Mm.
or Black Lives Matter, and all these other, big collective dramatic events that affect us all as a community, right? And so if you're highly sensitive, you will feel those things because that's the nature of being highly sensitive. And so I help people realize what those sensitivities are, target those, and then transform them in a way that they're no longer getting in your way. And that's what I call, going from weakness to power,
Yep.
because once there's awareness and once you're in control of what you thought was, a weakness, now that's a power, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. I'm making a note. So let's talk about hope. What is it, and why is it so important?
Well, I mean, my relationship with hope and really everything that led to most of my content that is related to hope as a mindset really started with an invitation to give a talk, a 15-minute public speaking engagement about hope in Christ. And that's usually how we tend to see hope, together with faith, with family, with happiness. So we tend to see those things grouped together very often. And as consumers, we already associate it, right? What you see, you tend to associate, especially if you're very visual and that's your sensitivity, right? And so I did my research, faith in Christ, that's great. I, quoted tons of verses and whatnot. But I'm a researcher at heart, right? I'm a literature major. And I just, as a coach, I felt like I couldn't let it go. And I just kept researching. And upon my research, I realized that there's a plethora of data that states that hope is its own mindset, its own thing. Um, and this is all by the American Psychological Association, which kind of points me to think that there's other research out there, right? Not just by the APA. And once I realized that, it I was so grabbed by it. I didn't want to let it go. I wanted to figure out what it was as a mindset, how I can use it as a tool, and how I can teach people how to use hope as a tool instead of just kind of brushing it aside, which is what I think we've done as a society or culturally speaking. I've had people come up on my show and tell me that hope is the laziest word in the dictionary and things like that because it kind of has like a bad rap. But in reality, it's a mindset that happens right here in the prefrontal cortex, which kind of implies that it's a choice as well. And without hope, there's no future visioning. So
Mm.
anybody looking to understand the concept of goal setting, goal achieving, the you actively apply hope every step of the way, right? And then there's also the reality of those who are at a different level, struggling with their mental health. So, for example, depression. Well, there's actual hope in the fact that you might have just gotten up in the morning today. There's
Yeah.
so much hope in that, right? And so I couldn't let it go. And before I knew it, I had a whole package, right? A whole series about this. And I've been talking about it ever since.
So there's this balance between science. There's science behind it, but there's also, like um, the faith that hope. And I think that's probably why it kind of gets a kind of a bad rap, which is, we see hope as kind of being a. I'm trying to think of the way of describing it. It's, why don't you just do it rather than hoping? Um, Whereas, as you say, sometimes for some people, actually just getting up in the morning is difficult enough.
Correct. Right. And sometimes we are in that mode of just surviving,
Hmm.
right? And the question is, how can we get you from surviving to thriving? I'm sure you've heard those two words together, right? Because they're complete opposites. And as a survivor, I do this every single day, right? Because I'm still triggered. There's still things that kind of they create kind of a ruckus in my confidence, and codependency still shows up, right? Even though I'm in a healthy relationship. So I'm one of those believers that think healing never ends. It's an ongoing journey, especially if you've already experienced trauma that involves other people, like domestic violence and toxic abuse, right? Because you never know when you're going to meet someone else that is toxic. This could be at the
Yeah.
supermarket, this could be at a new job. This could be one of your own followers that just decided to follow you today, right? So you just never know. And it's a day-to-day thing. And sometimes the bare minimum is really where the hope is. Now, how can we strive little by little for more and more and more? And I feel like understanding the the difference between the types of hope, which is kind of where I started. So I took the work of Julie Naras in her book Apprentice to Hope, which is it includes faith and it includes, a Christian lens to it, and it's about grieving. So there's a lot of hope in the grieving process after you've lost someone. And I took those types of hope that we can definitely dive into, and I have just contextualized it to the everyday. How are you applying this type of hope versus this one? What does that say about the awareness of the reality? And how can you flip that in order to be more productive and just work one step at a time? And it's fascinating. I think so.
So absolutely, and so talk to us about the different types of hope.
Right. So, again, the types of hope are described by Julie Naras. So, this is all her work. Inborn hope. That would be the inkling of an idea, just that first hint of, ooh, I wonder what it would be like to do this or to do that, right? Or I wonder how this person might help me if I follow them, right? Like that tiny little hint of an idea, that's inborn hope. Then there's chosen hope, which, in all honesty, we could arguably say that all hope is chosen. You
Mm.
choose to hope or you choose to walk away. So, but as a difference, there's chosen hope, and we can think about chosen hope as these collective movements like Black Lives Matter, where people go out in the streets for a common goal, everybody hoping for the same thing,
Hoping
right?
for the same thing. Yes.
Exactly, right. And you choose to do it, especially as a collective.
Yep.
Um, then there's bargainer's hope. This is one of my favorites as a coach. We do it all the time. And the perfect example for this is following a Pinterest recipe. And Pinterest is very visual. So you're going to have a beautiful picture of what that cake is supposed to look like, right?
Mm.
And you follow the recipe and you do it with so much love, but the cake comes out and it looks nothing like the picture. Right? And then you may go into, a spiral of, I'm not good enough. I'm not a good enough mom because this doesn't look like the picture. And you just bargain. You looked at the recipe and you said, it must look like this because I'm following the recipe, right? When in reality, you might have chosen the wrong salt, or it said olive oil and you chose avocado oil. Like, you just
Mm.
never know all these
Yep.
variables. So why are you putting your hope on something that doesn't really demand it, right? So that's bargainer's hope, and I think it's fascinating. We go through this almost every day without noticing, right? And then there's unrealistic hope, which I think applies deeply to these toxic relationships where we
Yep.
just we focus on that, and we get fixated on someone,
Is
and
that where we say we hope it's going to be better? We hope it's going to be better next time. It will be okay. It will be all right.
or you might think, this person will change,
Yeah.
and if I just stick through it, it'll be so much better in the end.
Mm.
Well, we don't really want to visualize the end. If you are in a toxic relationship, that could be very tragic, right? And so that's unrealistic hope. And then she mentions false hope, which is obviously just a complete waste of time. But this is where I like to bring my own research in, because the American Psychological Association says they have no evidence of false hope in their research.
Okay.
And what that tells me is that there's hope for everyone, even if you feel like there's no hope. And that's where I bring it down to that, bottom line of, did you at least get up this morning?
Yeah.
There's so much hope there. It invariably probably got dressed as well, right? And maybe you're at that low point where personal hygiene is not necessarily a thing, which is, of course, a common symptom of depression. But you still did these things, and celebrating every step is so important, right? So I like to argue, bring that context in. The research says there's no false hope, so there's hope for everyone. And then what she calls mature hope, which is the last type of it, I call a perfect brightness of hope. And that's like, I'm focused on that end goal. It looks amazing from here. And then, of course, if I don't accomplish it, we'll talk about it. And then I call that mature hope. And the American Psychological Association actually calls it gratitude, which I found
Right.
so fascinating. So, what they say is the ultimate mindset for a hopeful person is gratitude. And here's where it becomes tricky, especially in the context of toxic abuse, is, can you look at your past experiences once you're out of that, right? Once you've, really transitioned into a life of your own, can you look at your past trauma with gratitude? That's very tricky, right? Nobody
Yes.
wants to be grateful for the abuse, but can you look at it and say, I'm grateful for the lessons. I'm grateful for how strong I made it out in the end.
Mm.
I'm grateful because now I get to be an advocate and help other victims, right?
Yeah.
So there's so much hope in looking back with gratitude. And of course, practicing
Mm.
gratitude every day. I feel like it's an essential ingredient in practicing hope little by little to get to that goal.
And I agree. I think it's a great it takes time, but it can be a great place to be, to say that, that happened. It was terrible at the time. I had difficulty getting out of bed, or even, but I'm stronger now, and I've actually learnt from that. And as you say, you can serve others by saying, "This is my experience, and you're in a similar place, and this is what I did." And in a way, that it's a great way of showing, of being, of gratitude for that bad, the thing that happened to us.
Yeah, gratitude for the trauma. It's a touchy subject for sure,
Yeah,
right? I get a lot of defensive energy from it. But that's
I can
that's
imagine. Yeah,
yeah, that's part of the work, right? That we would work on is how can I get you to flip this? Because when you're being defensive, I feel like you may still be in that survivor mode, which is, of course, acceptable, valid, completely understandable. And as a coach, it's never my intent to steer people in any direction. As a coach, I'm there to help you and
yeah,
you guide me along, right? So I want to clarify that. But at the same time, one of the goals is definitely to get people and myself from that survivor mindset to I'm sorry, for the from the victim mindset to the survivor mindset. I'm done with that. I'm creating a new life for myself and I'm thriving in the process.
I agree. And um, yeah, I've seen a lot of it, and obviously been through things. None of us are in a situation where I think that we haven't been in have had something happen to us in the past, which has required us to dig ourselves out of a hole for some reason or other, whether it's job loss or relationship loss, or um, death or something like that, of a relative or something like that, and we've all had to pick ourselves up and try and find ways of getting ourselves back to where we were. And I love your is I've got one, two, three, four, five hopes, or is there six?
Uh Oh, thank you. I'm looking at my notes. So you're right. Borrowed hope. Oh, that's a big one. Thank you, Tim. So, borrowed hope is something that would probably answer one of the questions from our live streamers because it has to do with other people. So, the example that I like to use is someone in your family whom you love and trust. She's very specific about these two things. So, I like to always bring them up, and she being, Julie Naras in her work. Um, so, for example, a parent, you love them and you respect them and you trust them, right? They have a hope for you that you may not have for yourself, like the typical parent who wants you to be a doctor or a lawyer, or who thinks that you might make such a great teacher someday, right? Or who might want you to be a parent where in reality you want to be an entrepreneur, leader, mogul, right? So there's always that disconnect. However, when you're at your lowest, you may find yourself, tickling that idea of maybe this person is right and maybe I should, try that because I'm feeling kind of hopeless today. So I'm going to borrow that hope and see, try it on for size and see how it fits me and see how it resonates. Maybe they were right. Maybe you end up being not only successful, but happy and, in peace with your work. Or maybe you just tried it and now you know that it's not for you, but you
Yeah.
don't know until you try, right? And so I like to think of it as well as just lending out hope in general. So, absolutely, when we tend to let other people know that we believe in them when they don't believe in themselves, that's lending out hope. They borrow that hope from us. And my goal is to fill my cup so that I can outpour to others, and then in the hope obviously that they do them the same for other people, inevitably speaking. That's kind of what I call transcendental leadership, which is I lead with my own power, strength, values, it'll resonate with those that value the same things, and they will inevitably lead others after they lead themselves. So it all transcends from one person to the next, and it's beautiful. And that's kind of very empath of me to say, right? To transfer things from one person to the next is a highly sensitive empath thing to say, absolutely.
Grace, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your ideas and your insight about hope. It's a fascinating subject, something that we've not certainly not talked about on this podcast, and I'm really grateful for you to come on and share that with us. Thank you. Remind people
Absolutely.
where they can get hold of you.
Yeah, so you can find me on YouTube, actually. That's kind of new. My YouTube channel is at Graciela Moore. Same thing with LinkedIn. You can find me there as well, Graciela Moore. And then on Instagram, it's songofmyself.ig, which is kind of where I base like a branding thing. And on Twitter, SOM Coaching, which is the same as my website, somcoaching.com. And actually, I've just partnered with the Life Coach Club. So if you go to uslifecoachclub.org, you'll find me there as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on, and
Thank you.
thank you so much for sharing your insight about hope.
Absolutely. Any